Welcome to Costume Trek. I'm Nola, and today I'm going to teach you how to make some pajama pants. The first step is choosing the right pattern. There are a lot of different patterns on the market, and pretty much any of them will work. Most of the pajama pants patterns are unisex, which means they'll work for both men and women, but they will clearly say that on the pattern. When you're choosing your pattern, you have to make sure that your size is included in the pattern that you buy. On the front side of the pattern, it will tell you what sizes are in your pattern. In these cases, all the sizes are actually included in the pattern. When you're choosing your fabrics, I tend to like the nice flannels. They are very comfortable to sleep in. Cotton is considered the safest fabric for pajamas, and all children's wear is in cotton because it is not flammable. Although if you want to get something that has a little bit of stretch to it, it may not be 100% cotton, but it's probably high enough cotton, if you get it right, that it might be comfortable. So I am actually going to use my Wonder Woman fabric. When you get your fabric home, you need to pre-wash it before you cut it out. This will pre-shrink the fabric so that when you wash your pajama pants later, they don't turn into Barbie clothes. I learned a great trick over the summer. When you're pre-washing your fabric, if you lay it out so that you've got a double layer, and then you flip the top piece of the fabric over and serge this end together, when you wash it, it will come out of the washer and dryer without being all a big wad. And then you just cut the serging off and you're good to go. So now I have chosen to use this pattern, but now I have to figure out my size. So I go over here to the size chart, which is usually up at the very top. And because I'm making pants, I'm looking at my hip measurement. And technically I am a large, but I'm going to go ahead and cut mine out at extra large because I want my pajama pants a little bit roomy. Next, you go into your directions and you open it to this, which is a chart which shows you which pattern pieces you're looking for. I know I'm using 5, 6, and 7, which is the pants front, the pants back, and the pocket. I normally circle it so that I can refer back to it quickly. So now I'm looking for my pattern pieces. And it looks like my pattern pieces 5, 6, and 7 are all on one page. So I'm going to put back the other pattern pieces in the envelope and just cut these guys out. Notice when I'm cutting, I start almost all the way to the back edge and I cut most of the way down. And then I slide my scissors forward. This will give you better, smoother cuts. So I'm not cutting that and then sliding because that'll make it choppy looking. When you're cutting out your pattern piece, you need to make sure that your pattern pieces are very flat because when they come out of the envelope, they can be pretty wrinkled up, and you have to make sure that you're cutting on exactly the line. I turn over my pattern piece so that the lines are on the underside, and then I'm going to iron my pattern. Don't use steam, but you can iron it just like you would iron fabric. This will get out any creases and it will make your pattern more precise. Alright, so I laid out my fabric lengthwise, folded over in half, as you can see, which is what we call hot dog style. So it looks like a hot dog bun. I'm folding it so the outside of my fabric is on the inside of my fold. The outside of the fabric in your pattern is called the right side, and the inside of your fabric is called the wrong side. Make sure that you line up your edges very carefully so that they are lined up all the way down, because if you have something over the edge and you try and cut it, you may be sad. And now we're ready to lay out our pattern. Now I'm going to be pinning my fabric down. It may be tempting to line your fabric up with the edge like this, but you need to notice this arrow here. This arrow is the arrow that tells you how you line it up with the fabric. When you're dealing with fabric, you have threads that run vertically and threads that run horizontally. That's called the warp and the weft of the threads. And this arrow tells you that you need to run it with the threads. If you did it sideways, your pants would hang really funny. So you want to follow this line and have this line going with the threads in your fabric, which is basically the edge of this. So this line should be parallel to this edge. Notice that my pattern pieces, I have them fairly close together but not touching. I am trying to be as efficient with my use of fabric as possible so that I don't like have a big hole in the middle somewhere or anything like that. As I'm pinning, I go in for the edges of all of my pattern pieces. This is just so that it doesn't blow away in case the air conditioner kicks on. For this long section, I'm going to throw a pin in the middle. Notice that I'm pinning parallel to the edge of my pattern. I am not pinning this way, I'm pinning this way. Do not lift your fabric into your lap to cut it out. Either cut it flat out on the floor or cut it on a cutting table. My pattern piece for the pockets tells me to cut 4. Because I have this folded over, I have 2. So I have to just cut one more section of pockets and then I've got everything. The next step is to serge around all of your pieces individually, being very careful to not serge the edges off, because then it's going to get too small. Now that I have all of my pieces serged, the next step is to sew together the 2 crotch seams. I get my back pattern piece and I sew it together along this curve. When you're putting your pieces together, if one curve seems smaller than the other, then that's because you've got the 2 wrong pieces together. So make sure that the back piece is attaching to the other side of the back piece and the front is attaching to the front piece. And now we sew this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. When you're ironing seams open and it's a straight line, that's easy, you just iron your seam open. But when you get to a curve, you need to cut out little triangles on where it's curving, being very careful not to cut into the seam you just made, but close to it. That will help release the fabric and allow the fabric to stretch around your curve. You don't need a lot, but you need it where the curve is. This is called an ironing ham, and it is used for ironing around curves. It's very important to iron your seams open. It helps them lay flat and look professional. So my next step is to figure out exactly where my pockets go. So I refer back to the instructions and I see that the pockets don't go all the way up to the top. So I need to grab my pattern piece because my pattern piece will tell me where the thing goes. There's a little notch. This little triangle is called a notch, and it will show me where to line up my pockets. Normally, when you cut out a pattern, you would actually put the notch into your fabric, but considering we serged all the way around, we would have lost our notch anyway, so we're doing it now instead. And all I'm doing is I'm taking a pin and I am marking exactly where the center of the notch is. And then take my pocket pattern, and it has a matching notch. So I line it up, mark that notch. Then I can put them, my pockets are right sides together. As you can see, line that up with the other pin. And now I know exactly where my pocket is supposed to sit. And I get that pinned and ready for sewing. And I do all 4 sides the same way. Now I am sewing all of my pockets on as per the instructions, remembering to reverse stitch. Always cut the thread tails off as you go so that you don't have threads all over the place when you're done. And again, I come over here and I iron my seams open. So this is the top of the pajama pants. You can see my little pockets floating on the edge. And we're gonna go down here to the center crotch seam. And then we're gonna take the other piece and find its center crotch seam. And we're gonna line them up. And then we'll start pinning. And what I do is I line up my seams and then I put a pin on either side so it holds the seam allowance in place. That way when I sew them, there's no problems. So now I pin from the center crotch seam. From there, I start pinning down, lining up the edges of my fabric all the way down. And I do that on both pant legs. I start at one pant leg end and I sew all the way through to the other side. Now that I've ironed my seams open, I will be sewing the side seams up. So you take your pattern, your pants, and find the two tops. So I'm lining up my tops. And look, it looks like a pair of pants almost. All right, so then I find my side seams, lay that out, and I can see that it's pants. I can see two legs. It's very easy to accidentally make a skirt in this place, so you don't want to do that. And now I'm going to pin my sides together. It's always best to start at the top. If you have pockets, which I recommend because pockets are cool, these are the easiest kind of pockets in the world to put in. You want to make sure that you line up your edges with each other. Don't worry that the back is actually wider than the front. You're just lining up your edges. And soon you're gonna have pants. Right here I'm making sure that all 4 layers fold the same directions. And notice that I'm putting my pins about 4 inches apart. You don't want too many pins because then you run the greater risk of running over pins with your sewing machine. All right, back to the sewing machine. You're gonna sew literally around your pocket. Then I stop sewing about 1/2 inch in and put my needle into the fabric, lift up the presser foot, pivot, put down the presser foot, and I keep going. And now the basic pants are finished. The next step is the waistband. As always, you have to iron your seams open. With this, now that it is pants legs and not anything flat, I'm using my sleeve board in order to iron it, because I can just slide this on top, and so now we're just ironing the one side. The next step is putting in the buttonholes for your drawstrings. You need to make sure that you put your buttonholes in the center front instead of the center back of your pajama pants. The easiest way to do that is to look inside the pants, and the seam that's the shortest is in the front and the bigger seam is in the back. So my pattern piece has a little mark on it which shows me where the buttonhole goes. So I line up my pieces on the inside, taking into account the seam, and that shows me where to put my buttonhole. The easiest way to mark it is to put a pin in both sides. Flip that up, Put another pin in. Take the old pin out. Flip this one up. Put another pin in there. Take that one out. And now I know where my holes go. I'm taking a special pen. It's called a friction pen, and it is erasable from friction. And this is the only brand that does this. But I can use this kind of pen, draw my line out in between my two marks, draw the line, top and bottom. Then I do the same thing on the other side. Cool thing about the friction pen is when I iron over it, the line disappears. To create buttonholes, I first change out the presser foot. To the buttonhole foot. Putting this away so we don't lose it. This knob up here adjusts the width of the zigzag stitch. Normally when you're regularly sewing, it's on a 0. For a buttonhole, you turn it to a 4 or a 5. Then we go down here to this one, which is the stitch length. And you can see there's even a little diagram of a buttonhole on here. And I usually put it sort of in the middle of the diagram. Then I come down here and I have more. These are zipper diagrams. So you start here. This one goes backwards, this one goes forwards, and then these are the two ends of the buttonholes. So we always start on this one. I'm putting my fabric in where I want the buttonhole. I'm making sure that my line is lined up with the presser foot. And I'm on number 1. And I just go for 5 to 10 stitches. Then I always go to number 4 because 4 goes forward and I like to see what I'm doing. Then back to 1. You always want to take the needle up when you switch the setting. Then 2 takes us backwards. So then I take my buttonhole out of the machine, clip my threads, and I have a lovely buttonhole. We open the buttonhole with a seam ripper. Just open it that way, and then I go in with scissors for more precise opening. You don't want to open it all the way to the edges with the seam ripper. You will rip your fabric. If you've never done buttonholes before, or even if you have done buttonholes before but it's been a while, I always practice on a scrap of fabric before I do it on my actual garment because you can't undo these. The next step is creating the casing for your elastic because we're going to do an elastic and a drawstring. You can do either the elastic or the drawstring. I prefer both, then your pants don't fall down quite so easily. I have a 1-inch non-roll elastic. This is the sort of thing that you want to get. You could get a narrower elastic, but I wouldn't buy a wider elastic. Make sure that it says non-roll on it. Right, take it out of the package. My buttonhole is not going to be on the outside of my pants. Looks like it's going to be on the inside. Because I have to have enough room to do a stitch at the very top and at the bottom and still fit the elastic in. But I think that this pattern was designed for a different width elastic or no elastic, so we're just gonna go with this. Once I've determined how wide I need to have my space for my elastic, I take a ruler and I measure that space so that I can get it the same all the way around. So in this case, it's about 1.5 inches wide, and put pins in so that it's going to be the same all the way around. I have the waistband pinned and now I'm ready to sew it. I've switched out back to regular sewing mode from buttonholes. I usually start in the center back at the bottom of my casing and close it up, and then I just go all the way around. Then I go back in and I do a small seam about 1/8 of an inch from the top. So the easiest way to do that is I'm lining up the edge of the fabric with the edge of my presser foot, but I've used the stitch width to move it all the way over to this side, and I sew all the way around. So the waistband casing is ready for elastic. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm taking my handy dandy seam ripper and I'm going to open up the center back inside so I have a way to put my elastic in. This will get sewn back shut when I'm done. Next, I'm putting the elastic in. This elastic is a yard long, which is much larger than my waist. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it around my waist. And okay, it's not much larger than my waist. It is longer than my waist. So I put it around my waist. I have it fairly comfortable. And I'm going to cut it off about 1 inch to 2 inches longer than my waist. Then I put a safety pin in one end. Then I take my other end, put a safety pin in that, and then I safety pin it to the outside of my pajamas so I don't accidentally pull the whole thing through. Then using the safety pin to push it through, I run the elastic through the waistband, which is a slow process. So then you work it all the way through and pull it out. Now is the point where you have to be careful. When you take the safety pins off, you don't want to lose the elastic back inside because that is a sad, sad day. So then you take your other elastic and you want to pin it together, and then you want to work it all the way back into your waistband. And you're going to want to try it on and test the elastic length because you may shorten it before you sew it. Once you get the waistband adjusted to your waist size, then you can go ahead and sew it in place, put it inside, and sew it back shut. Okay, so my waistband feels pretty good. So I'm going to take these back off and sew up my elastic. All right, so I've pulled my elastic out enough so that I have enough to sew with. Now I'm taking it to the machine. And I sew a little box. And I pull my elastic and push it into the casing so that it's all inside. It's a little snug. That's okay. Then I'll sew this back shut by hand, just hand stitch it. It's all inside. For my drawstring, I cut out a piece of my leftover fabric that is about a little over 1 inch wide by my waist measurement plus about 24 inches. So the easiest way to turn this into an actual drawstring is with the serger. So I turn the serger on, and then I create a very long tail out of the serger thread. The next step, I put my fabric into the serger. I put it in with the right side facing up to me. I'm putting my serger thread tail right in the center of my fabric, fold it over, putting it into the serger. I have to make sure that my serger thread tail is always back here, so I'm not sewing over it. Then I start serging, then I readjust, gently pulling my serger tail. And I do this all the way down to the end. As I come to the end, I still have my tail of serger thread and it's still centered. I trim off the serging from what I just serged, carefully not cutting my tail. Then I go back to this end, and then the trick is getting it started. Once it gets started, life is golden. I'm going to pull on my tail. So I have my drawstring finished, so I'm going to run it through my waistband just like I did the elastic with the same trick with the safety pins. And it's the same sort of thing, but this time I'm putting it through my buttonholes that I created earlier. And it's just going to run all the way through just like the elastic did. I got my drawstring in. I tied knots on the ends of my drawstring so that they don't accidentally fly back inside. So we are in the home stretch now. The next thing to do is the hem. For marking your hem, you're going to need a friend. In my case, my wonderful assistant and cameraman, Brian, is going to come and help out by marking my hem. So Brian was nice enough to put a pin in 1/4 inch up from the floor. So I'm lining up the center crotch seam with itself so that I've got my pants legs the same length. Then I'm going to check his pins. One pin is definitely a little bit lower than the other pin, so I'm just going to split the difference. I'm also going to cut about 1 inch lower so that I have hem allowance. So there's my pin. The other pin I can feel through here. It's actually quite a bit lower, so I'm just going to do that sort of at the middle there. Then I'm going to take my friction pen. Mark that. I'm going to actually cut it 1 layer at a time because the 4 layers of fabric is very difficult to cut through. So here's number 1. Number 2. Then I'm going to serge around the bottom edge, then flip it up and sew it. I'm ready for my hem. I have it all pinned in place. I'm going to sew right along the edge of the serging. And with that, my Wonder Woman pants are finished. I probably could have gone down a size because they are kind of enormous, but they have pockets, so I now can do the happy pocket dance. Super comfortable, warm in the winter, and snug as a bug in a rug. Thanks for watching Costume Trek, and we'll catch you next time. If you want to experience the world one costume at a time with us, subscribe, ring the bell, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check out our website, costumetrek.com. See you next time!